Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Mr. McMahon is a legendary rivalry that fascinated millions of viewers. The most famous storyline in WWE history that transformed pro wrestling into a real cultural phenomenon. Remember in the previous episode, which you should watch if you haven't yet, we saw how Steve Austin almost killed the official Bruce Prichard when he was driving the Zamboni to the ring. How the writer Vince Russo justified the controversial decision to make the Big Boss win the Royal Rumble, but also what Stone Cold was thinking before attacking his rival in his hospital room, and even how Big Show had to stay hidden for hours under the ring before debuting in their match in February 1999. In this new episode, you will discover how they managed to take this rivalry even further and completely renew it in one of the most controversial wrestling scenes of all time. The very surprising wrestler who was supposed to be the leader of the corporate ministry initially, and why this idea was finally cancelled, but also how Stone Cold became the CEO of the company in a mind-blowing twist, and why two crucial people in the rivalry left the company in the fall of 1999. You are on the Wrestling Paradise. Stone Cold Steve Austin against Mr. McMahon, the iconic rivalry that captivated millions of viewers. Episode 3. Let's go. Coming out of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view on February 14th, 1999, and after an iconic steel cage match between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon, their rivalry already seemed to have reached its peak. After spectacular segments, months of war, and finally a one-on-one match for Valentine's Day, the question we can ask ourselves is this: can they go even further? As Vince Russo says, one of the key men behind the writing of this storyline full of twists and turns that has been going on for more than a year, everyone in the company was inspired by the energy of the Austin versus McMahon rivalry. It has taken the Federation into a new era and enabled it to lead in the ratings war against WCW. According to Russo, Steve Austin gave the attitude to the Attitude Era. The fact is that on this road to WrestleMania 15, it's time for Stone Cold to focus on his title chase now, and in this quest, he is still opposed to his nemesis. Indeed, at the Showcase of the Immortals, he will face Vince's chosen one, the corporate champion, The Rock obviously. Mr. McMahon will want his representative to keep his title and keep the rattlesnake away from it. Something surprising to say about this period is that the Big Show didn't really have as much importance as we could have imagined. While he had still debuted in the Federation in a major way at the end of the McMahon versus Austin match, and seemed to become a new big enemy for Stone Cold. We will mostly note a singles match between the two men on Raw on March 22nd, which Steve won. I personally agree with the official Bruce Prichard, who thinks they should have protected this match for later while building Big Show like a monster, and possibly make it the WrestleMania main event next year. We may find that everything was a little rushed with the Giant, even if in reality, more important things were going on. Precisely on March 22nd, a legendary moment will take place to open Raw, joining the collection of iconic scenes from the Austin vs. McMahon rivalry. While the latter is in the ring with his son Shane and The Rock, the Rattlesnake will arrive in a beer truck and spray them in a scene that is, in my opinion, one of the funniest of all time. Look at this extraordinary acting by Vince, who looks like he's drowning. It's interesting to point out that apparently, behind the scenes, the company was also trying to get sponsored by beer brands and even wanted Steve Austin to have his own beer, since he was so much linked to this beverage. About this scene, the Rattlesnake revealed that in reality, his boss had only paid for about 113 liters of beer, and that once he had reached the end of this amount, he was actually spraying water on his rivals. Steve also says he almost made a mistake in this segment at the moment when he tried to drink from the hose. The water chute was so powerful that he almost knocked himself out, which would have been completely absurd. Fortunately, in the end, the scene was successful and proved once again that anything could happen in the Federation at that time. As Bruce Prichard said, they asked themselves every week how they could go beyond what they had already done. They wondered what the next OMG moment was for Stone Cold. A few days later, at WrestleMania 15, Steve Austin will have his title shot against The Rock, and I must say, I am a fan of their chemistry personally. It's just too bad this show didn't take place in a stadium worthy of the grandest stage of them all. The Commissioner Shawn Michaels will prohibit the corporation from intervening and potentially sabotaging the Texas Rattlesnake. According to rumors, there were talks at one time that this WrestleMania 15 main event would be a triple threat with Also Mankind. But I think this one-on-one match between Austin and Rocky was what made the most sense in the storyline. Let's not forget the seeds of this match were sown as early as November at Survivor Series. On that day, The Rock turned heel by joining the corporation to everyone's surprise, at a time when Austin was already determined to reclaim his title that Vince managed to make him lose at Breakdown in September. It was real long-term storytelling, even more so. If we consider they already had a feud at the end of 1997 for the Intercontinental title, where we already felt their chemistry after 6 months of hardships, and all kinds of schemes that prevented him from taking his belt back on March 28, 1999. Stone Cold Steve Austin finally became champion again and was back at the top of the company. We can say this is a happy end for the Rattlesnake and his fans after all these obstacles he had to overcome. However, behind the scenes, it wasn't an easy time for him because he was in the middle of a divorce. He admitted that the personal problems he had in mind made him forget his sleeveless leather jacket that he always wears for his entrances. He had left it at his house, and that's why he was wearing a t-shirt during his entrance, which usually never happens. In the following shows, Austin will want to get his customized title again, the Smoking Skull belt, the one that Vince had stolen from him a few months earlier. This will lead him to find The Rock on a bridge on April 12th, who will manage to throw him into the water with this belt. This is yet another iconic scene they had shot at 1 o'clock in the morning, with an authorization to interrupt all the traffic during the filming. What's even crazier is that at that time, Stone Cold was involved in a real-life accident while he was going to an airport and he got hit by a car. That time, Vince McMahon had nothing to do with it, but the boss will very soon find a new way to bother him. You will see that the rivalry will be more and more surprising, so make sure to stay until the end of the video. After WrestleMania 15, a brand new storyline will begin which fully concerns the Texas Rattlesnake and Mister McMahon, the one of the corporate ministry. It's important to understand beforehand that in the previous months, the corporation, which is Vince's faction with its allies, and the Ministry of Darkness, this dark sect led by The Undertaker, were battling for the control of the company. While at first, these two factions were clearly two separate entities. There will be several twists and turns which will lead to one of the most famous angles in the Federation's history at the Backlash pay-per-view. There will be a rematch of the WrestleMania main event between The Rock and Austin, which the latter will win despite the fact that Shane McMahon is the referee. In the aftermath, while the Rattlesnake finally gets his customized belt, we see the kidnapping of Stephanie, Vince's daughter, by The Undertaker. This scene has become legendary in the meantime, and was apparently a Vince Russo idea. Taker's plan was to marry Stephanie by force in one of their dark ceremonies, but on April 26th, against all odds, Stone Cold will be saving the daughter of his sworn enemy from the dead man's hands. Considering how Vince was logically affected by what happened as a father, and that he was grateful to the Rattlesnake for saving his daughter, one could wonder if an alliance between the two men was possible. Perhaps Mr. McMahon was no longer going to be the evil tyrant he had been until now, especially since his son Shane blamed him for no longer being the man he once was. This will materialize on April 29th in the pilot of the SmackDown show. The corporation, now led by Shane, and the Ministry of Darkness will merge to form a new faction. Stone Cold Steve Austin would be one of their major targets, and they would be called the Corporate Ministry. Putting ourselves in the place of the spectators in 1999, we could wonder if, from now on, Shane was the one who took over from his father in the war against Austin. What if Vince had finally accepted his defeat and that, now, this corporate ministry was going to make Stone Cold's life miserable? In reality, they will take a completely different direction. First, a match will take place at the next pay-per-view, Over the Edge, the one where the wrestler Owen Hart tragically died. There, Shane will enable his henchman, The Undertaker, to become champion by being one of the referees of his match against Stone Cold once again. The Rattlesnake's reign wasn't very long and ruined by the McMahon family, and more specifically Shane, perhaps Vince's successor. Or would the real antagonist of the Rattlesnake rather be this higher power, this superior force to which the corporate ministry refers, and who would be the individual from whom the faction receives its orders? On a personal note, I must admit I think this storyline was a little confusing, even if it at least enabled to renew what surrounded the Stone Cold character. But its outcome is going to be a total setback. On June 7th, while Austin is no longer champion, this higher power will be revealed, the real mastermind behind the corporate ministry, and in particular the kidnapping of Stephanie. On a personal note, I expected that it might be a new wrestler with a supernatural gimmick, someone powerful enough to make The Undertaker obey to him, but there will be a tremendous swerve. The higher power is none other than Vince McMahon. We must admit that it isn't easy to find much sense in it. Apparently, his plan was to get into Austin's head and make him lose his title. To achieve these goals, Vince was ready to do anything. including having his own daughter kidnapped. This is a completely unexpected revelation that may seem incoherent for some fans. Indeed, when this higher power was mentioned for the first time, The Rock was still the champion. In fact, the real reason for all this confusion is very simple. Initially, during the writing of this storyline, Mr. McMahon wasn't supposed to be revealed as the Grandmaster behind the corporate ministry. It was supposed to be the wrestler Christopher Daniels, who was on the independent circuit at that time. Writer Vince Russo told why Daniels was ultimately not chosen. He said that at that time there was a buzz around Daniels in the Indies and he had his fallen angel character. Russo proposed the idea to Vince, but he didn't know who Daniels was at all. Daniels came to the show, but when Vince saw him, he said to Russo that this guy wasn't the hype, that they're not going to do that. That's why there was a last-minute change. It was a physical problem. The boss couldn't ignore the fact that he thought Daniels was small. By learning this, we understand the inconsistencies, but fortunately, the rest will still be great in my eyes. After learning what Vince was able to do in his obsession to destroy Austin, Linda, his wife, and Stephanie will take revenge. They will announce that they are giving their share of this family business to Stone Cold Steve Austin, who officially becomes the CEO of the company, the new boss. Personally, seeing this new twist, I think it is a very smart way of giving an unprecedented aspect to the Austin-McMahon rivalry. We have a reversal of the roles. For the first time in their history, Stone Cold is the one in a power position now. The period leading up to the King of the Ring pay-per-view in 1999 is personally one of my favorites in the entire history of the Austin-McMahon rivalry. Although a few weeks before, we seem to be moving away from it. The company finally managed to keep it going in a creative way. One element that I find brilliant and relevant given their past is that their feud is no longer only about the WWE title as it often was. Now it's about more global stakes since Stone Cold is the new boss of the Federation. He is no longer just a poster boy that Vince doesn't want for his company, but a real threat to his own job from now on. This new CEO status will lead to several amazing segments where Austin, in his new position, goes to the company's headquarters to make some adjustments. In some really funny scenes, we will see him teach a receptionist how to answer the phone like him, fire someone because he looks stupid, have a contest of who manages to drink the most beers during a board meeting, reduce Vince's salary to increase Mick Foley's, who needs money to pay his medical bills. He will also fill Mr. McMahon's office with manure, and for the record it was real manure on top of that. These are scenes that I really found funny, and they also showed that Stone Cold wasn't only capable of being incredibly intense, but also entertaining in a more comedic register. The fact is that this revival of the rivalry will lead to an exciting and creative new match. A brilliant idea unlike anything else they have done before, a corporate ladder match for control of the company. To be precise, it is a ladder match between Steve Austin on the one hand and Vince and Shane McMahon on the other, with a colossal challenge to succeed in getting the briefcase hanging from the ceiling and become the one and only boss of the company. Once again, we can salute this will to make the matches as interesting as possible with important stakes in terms of storylines, new stipulations. The match itself is going to be just as great thanks to the enormous suspense about its outcome. Thanks to these three charismatic performers who went all in. Thanks to all the intensity this fight exuded. At one point, when Stone Cold seems about to win, the briefcase is mysteriously raised to prevent him from catching it. However, it will be lowered just as Shane is about to go on the ladder, which will enable to get the victory for his father and him, who therefore regain full control of the company. The amazing thing is that we will never know who was lowering or raising the briefcase, even if we could read that it was the big boss man, who was going to come back to the corporation later. At that moment, the McMahons are back in power. Stone Cold hasn't been champion since the end of May and after many months of war and swerves. It's time for this iconic rivalry in pro wrestling history between Stone Cold and Vince to have a definitive winner. The Monday Night Raw after this crazy King of the Ring is going to be historic. First, the McMahons congratulate themselves on their victory the day before and announce that Stone Cold will now be a jobber who will no longer be in the main events and that he will be uninstalling the ring at the end of the shows. But then, the Rattlesnake arrives and says he had anticipated that they would screw him. So while he was still the CEO, he set up a title match for him against The Undertaker the same night. Having such an important match in a weekly show, and not on a pay-per-view obviously, will create a historical interest from the viewers. With 10 million viewers, this main event for the title between Austin and The Undertaker will be the most watched live match in Raw history. A number that lets us imagine how the Attitude Era and more precisely the Stone Cold McMahon rivalry was a real cultural phenomenon. To top it off, the Rattlesnake will even regain the title. Subsequently, Vince will announce that this whole story between the two men must end. And it is undeniable that in almost 2 years, if we start it from its infancy, this rivalry seems to have offered everything it could give to the fans. An end of an era match will therefore be organised at the fully loaded pay-per-view on July 25th, 1999, and its stakes are absolutely mind-blowing. It will be a first blood match where the first one who bleeds loses between Stone Cold and The Undertaker, with Vince McMahon in ringside. If Stone Cold wins and retains his title, Vince will be forced to leave the Federation forever. If The Undertaker wins, Stone Cold will never have a title opportunity again. In any case, it would be the end of an era, and for sure, nothing would ever be the same. On July 12th, Vince will even sign the contract for the match with the blood of the rattlesnake in a highly symbolic scene. Anyway, at Fully Loaded, in what is apparently the final chapter of their exciting storyline, it will all end with a chaotic finish. Austin will manage to make Taker bleed with a camera shot and win the match, then put an end to this rivalry by doing a stunner to Mr. McMahon before the latter leaves the Federation. It was really a full circle moment, since it all started in September 1997 with a stunner. The next day, on Raw, Vince will say goodbye to Stone Cold and Jim Ross, who even sing a special song to accompany his exit. And then we can still ask ourselves some questions. Now that this rivalry between the Rattlesnake and the Big Boss has come to an end, will it have the slightest sequel, one way or another? Will the company have the same success without this rivalry that was like its quarterback for months and enabled it to get more attention than ever? Knowing that between January and the end of July 1999, when their feud was a central element of the shows, there were between 5.4 and 8 million viewers, will they be as high now? On the other hand, what more can be done between the two men? What new challenges? What new stipulations? How can they possibly renew their storyline? What is certain is that the following years will answer all these questions. Once the rivalry between Vince McMahon and Stone Cold Steve Austin is officially over, for now at least, several significant events will happen during the following months that can make us wonder if the golden age of this rivalry isn't definitively buried, and even if it could have the slightest sequel during the fall of 1999. Vince will still end up coming back to defend the honor of his wife, who had been taken to task by the new champion since SummerSlam and new top heel of the company. Triple H, what is completely crazy is that thanks to an interference by Stone Cold on the game, his rival, the Rattlesnake, will indirectly make Mr. McMahon win the title on September 16th. Shortly after, the two men will not even be far from being allies when Austin will officially allow Vince to come back to the company to get a title shot in return. All this was completely unthinkable even a few months before. At the same time, another event will take place behind the scenes that must not be overlooked. The departure in October 1999 of Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara, who had been the writers of the shows all the previous months. Russo even occupied this role from the beginning of the rivalry between McMahon and Austin. They are going to leave for WCW because they simply couldn't stand the life their boss imposes on them. Together they had to write Raw and SmackDown every week, possibly a pay-per-view, work every day from 4 in the morning to late at night, having to constantly present their ideas to Vince, constantly rework everything. It was an exhausting routine which prevented any family life. That was something unbearable for Russo, who asked his boss if he could have a lighter schedule to see his wife and children more often. But McMahon answered him that given the money he was earning now, he just had to pay a nanny. Russo really didn't like this reaction, and it prompted him to leave. And in the end, in the fall of 1999, the Federation therefore loses two key men in the writing of its successful rivalry. Could they resurrect this storyline even without them? Would they have the same success? And that's not all. At that time, Austin will also have side effects from his big neck injury at SummerSlam in 1997 and need surgery, which will keep him out of the ring for almost a year. In kayfabe, the Federation will justify this long absence by having him run over by a car at Survivor Series. We will learn that the man behind this act was actually Triple H, even if it was Ricochet who did the dirty work. For the record, behind the scenes, the officials hesitated for a long time before deciding who would be the man who ran over Stone Cold, an angle that the Rattlesnake sees as the worst of his career. At one point, according to the writer Brian Gewirtz, they even considered Taz for this role, the former ECW wrestler. The fact is that because of his injuries, the Rattlesnake will disappear from the screens for a while. As he says, he could have continued, but it wouldn't have been a smart decision. If we take a step back, it's amazing to see that in just a few weeks, the company lost the writers who are responsible for its best ratings ever, but especially its #1 superstar. And we must be sufficiently aware of the Rattlesnake's importance that year, an importance that was sublimated by his rivalry with Mr. McMahon between January and July. Just with his merch, Steve Austin earned $15 million in 1999, a tremendous sum. And in October 1999, the McMahon empire became a publicly traded company. And without the shadow of a doubt, Its excellent ratings thanks to its successful rivalry had a lot to do with it. Austin says he was afraid that after his injury, nothing would ever be the same again, that during his long absence others would take his spot, that the fans might no longer accept him, and he wasn't even sure to come back since at one point he even thought he would have to stop wrestling. It should be noted nevertheless that during this long period of absence, Stone Cold still appeared a few times to thwart his old rival's plans as in the good old days. He blew up the DX Express of the McMahon-Helmsley faction, of which Vince was part at that time with Triple H and Stephanie among others. And he helped The Rock to become champion at Backlash in April 2000. We can also consider that the People's Champion has somehow taken over the Rattlesnake's role of a babyface battling against authority figures throughout this period, with the storylines that continued without Austin for almost a year, with the departure of the writers who were there during the golden age of the rivalry against Vince, and the return of the Texan in the ring in September 2000, we can really wonder if his storyline against the company's boss will ever continue, or not. At Unforgiven on September 24th, 2000, Stone Cold will make his big return to the Federation. From there, he will immediately be important, especially in storylines to take revenge for what happened to him a year before when he got hit by a car. On the other hand, there won't be the slightest trace of a rivalry with Vince, which seems far away now since the Rattlesnake is focused on opponents like Ricochet and Triple H, among others. At the beginning of 2001, he will win his third Royal Rumble and will therefore get a farm, which would be a great story for him after this long period when his wrestling career was seriously compromised. At WrestleMania 17, he faces the former corporate champion who is now, with him, the Federation's most popular superstar. The two biggest stars face each other a few weeks after the war against WCW was definitively won and Vince bought his competition. This April 1st, 2001, in the Houston Astrodome for WrestleMania's return in a stadium in front of 67,925 spectators. In the first show in the company's history with more than 1 million pay-per-view buys, the unthinkable will happen. After an epic and violent battle between these two megastars, Stone Cold Steve Austin will team up with Vince McMahon to win the match in total heel fashion. He will shake hands with Satan himself, as Jim Ross says on commentary, and share a beer with the one who was his enemy for years. This scene made history and shocked the fans because the very idea of seeing the Rattlesnake sell his soul to the devil was unimaginable for many people. Personally, I find these images surreal in terms of symbolism, and it's normal to be shocked after everything we have seen since 1997. Why did Stone Cold Steve Austin do this? Has a new chapter in his relationship with Mr. McMahon on the screen just been launched? How will viewers react to this real earthquake on the wrestling planet? You will have all the answers in the next episode. In the next episode, you'll find out who came up with the idea for Stone Cold's heel turn at WrestleMania 17 and what the reasons for that were behind the scenes. Why Kurt Angle had to pay a $14,000 fine because of his segment with Austin and McMahon. How the Federation's ratings evolved from the spring of 2001. And even why the Rattlesnake left the company in 2002, and how his rivalry with the boss took a realer turn than ever during this period. In any case, we could see how the rivalry between Mr. McMahon and Steve Austin experienced major turning points between 1999 and 2001. Between the corporate ministry angle, which led to matches with higher stakes than ever, the Rattlesnake's injury, the departure of the writers Russo and Ferrara, and of course Stone Cold's unlikely heel turn at WrestleMania 17. Seeing how they managed to renew the rivalry for months and to go further and further in terms of stakes and memorable scenes, I have a debate for you. What could the company have imagined to keep the storyline going after Fully Loaded in the summer of 1990? Tell us what you think about it. Feel free to give your opinion so that we can discuss it in the comments. We can say that this rivalry is stupendous. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay on the Paradise of Wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?